Hello, and welcome back to 40K Fanatics. My name's Casey, and this is episode 1, if you're just joining us. Joining me today is Shane.
How we doing? What the heck is this podcast about?
Today we're talking about 40K, basically the setting so that people can get a brief understanding about it.
Now, once we get into this thing, we're going to do hobby stuff, we're going to do paint stuff, we're going to do game stuff, aren't we?
We're going to try, this is an early days podcast and YouTube channel, so hopefully we can get into that, really get deep into that, and then share it with the people all about the universe that we love and the people that love
Full disclosure, we're in Casey's garage.
it.
It is so hot. Uh but we're gonna get through it. Eventually we're gonna be very fancy and have a lovely studio and you'll be able to see our pretty faces.
Yeah, well, this is a big time podcast, and we're trying to get things professional here, really get into the grit of this thing. So, what we're doing is we're going to start off by saying thank you to Games Workshop, thank you to 40K, and thank you to Black Library for giving us all this awesome content, this awesome universe that we all love and adore. And Shane, do you have anything to add to
Oh, well, you're the lore master today and I'm
that?
and I'm kind of new, so I'm just going to play the audience. I've been playing the game 6 months maybe.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
I've got myself a Chaos Space Marine army. The Age of Sigmar has caught me, and so I've got the Night Haunt painting up those ghosty boys. And so I'm going to be the uninitiated. 10th edition's coming out. I imagine there's going to be a whole lot of people trying to figure out what you're going to tell us today, which is what the heck is the Imperium?
Yeah, so today we're talking about the Dark Imperium. It's going to lay out basically the setting of 40K, what we're going to be experiencing as far as the human existence, because the Imperium of Mankind is basically the main character of the setting. If you want to understand 40K, you got to get it from a black and white perspective of their eyes.
The Imperium is the good guys, right?
Well, basically in 40K, everybody agrees that the 40K setting has no good guys, and every single faction is a bad guy. But I'm going to say that the Imperium is a good guy. This is a hot take, by the way. I'm going to say that the Imperium is a bunch of good guys.
Hot take alert.
Yeah, so I'm going to say that the Imperium is good. However, individuals in the Imperium are self serving, so it can vary.
So the enslavement and burnout of all those psychers around the Golden Throne, that's good guy stuff.
I mean, if we had a Tau player in here, they'd be saying for the greater good, but Tau are relevant, so.
The history of the Tau appearing in a future episode.
All right, so we're going to kick things off with a quote from the first core rulebook. This is basically what you get when you want to start playing 40K, and it gives you a general vibe about the Imperium and the 40K setting. For more than 100 centuries, the Emperor has sat immobile on the golden throne of Earth. He is the master of mankind. By the might of his inexhaustible armies, a million worlds stand against the darkness. Yet he is a rotten carcass, the carrion lord of the Imperium, held in life by marvels from the dark age of technology and the thousand souls sacrificed each day so his soul may continue to burn. To be a man in such times is to be one amongst untold billions. It is to live in the cruelest and most bloody regime imaginable. It is to suffer an eternity of carnage and slaughter. It is to have cries of anguish and sorrow drowned by the thirsting laughter of dark gods. This is a dark and terrible era where you will find little comfort or hope. Forget the power of technology and science. Forget the promise of progress and advancement. Forget any notion of common humanity or compassion. There is no peace amongst the stars, for in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. What do you think, Shane?
Well, the whole book reads like that for those of you that have never cracked it open. And it's going to be interesting. That's the 9th edition core rulebook, and we're just about to move into 10th, and all of the rules are going to be available online to download. So I wonder if we're going to lose a little bit of that, you know, big metal show flavor that we have come to love.
Interesting.
I tell you what, my first question, I imagine that many of the uninitiated audience would wonder the same thing. Right there in the first paragraph, the Emperor's dead?
Yes, basically the Emperor, and we're going to touch on this here in a minute. The Emperor, he died, and he is just dying, really. As every second goes by, his soul gets pulled closer and closer to death. But thanks to the use of dark technology and a few of the black ships that the Imperium uses to ship 1,000 psychers to his throne every day, they sacrifice these 1,000 psychers just keep his soul burning and useful. Because if it goes out, so does the Imperium. We'll talk about that later, but if you look forward to hearing about that, we'll get to it. Shane, what do you think?
Uh, well, I want to know more about the Emperor. I want to know how he became a husk on the Golden Throne, sustained by these 1,000 psychers. But you've got notes,
Mhm.
you've got plans.
Yeah.
Zach Casey,
Okay.
run them down for the people.
Here we go. So the Imperium. Basically, it is the dark for the greater of humanity running of society kind of thing, but it's been touched on that, things like slavery or forced servitude, dogmatic religion rule, and heretics, anyone who thinks differently, are basically burned or killed. It started out very differently. You see, in a time of crisis, I want to say just before the 30th millennium, this is 40K, so before 30K,
10,000 years ago, kids.
basically 10,000 years ago, a noble and godlike man named the Emperor of Mankind rose to power on the planet Terra, which is Earth in the very far post-apocalyptic world. Humanity at that point throughout the Milky Way galaxy had spread everywhere. I'm talking dark planets with no sun, ice planets where they never get heat, planets that don't even rotate are filled with humanity, but they're cut off. Places that have, or planets that have and rely on supply lines were completely cut off. Warp storms happen throughout the universe. And we'll get to that in a minute. But the Emperor shows up on Terra and says that he is pronouncing the Terran Crusade, or the Unification Wars, let's call it, where he takes all of these post apocalyptic gangers, raiders, Mad Max looking guys, and he turns them into something called the Thunder Warriors, which are, if you've heard of 40K, a pre Space Marine in a sense. He takes this army of, well, for the lack of better terms, super soldiers, and he dominates the competition all over Terra. He raises the flag of the Imperium and tries to throw off the shackles of what is called Old Night. And Old Night is the superstitious sort of, we have to have faith in something kind of a way. Science and technology aren't really our focus, but dogmatic survivalism and religion and faith are.
Now, there is a lot of technology in 40K, and I was just recently made aware that at some point they got rid of the technology and the AI because they had like a Terminator situation. So, was that before or after the Emperor had started his crusade?
That was Old Night. That was before he started his Terran Crusade. Basically, mankind became so technologically advanced that they spread throughout the stars. However, they relied so much on technology. I mean, orcs, for example, you know how bad orcs are, and we'll talk about them in a minute. Orcs are basically unstoppable if you look at it a conquest perspective. And humanity could drop bombs with a nanotech virus from orbit and wipe out the entire orc infestation easily. We were basically demigods. I mean, the most valuable armor in the 40K setting is the Terminator armor, and they used to use it like forklifts and farming equipment.
Oh wow! See, I wasn't aware of that. So they have this technology bite back at them. They shun it. They go into like a Dark Ages sort of thing, and everything gets broken down to like this tribalism. Then the Emperor comes and he unites the tribes on Terra so that there's like one ruler, one government, and then the technology takes a crazy turn.
Yeah, basically, he had been underneath the Himalayan mountains in a secret laboratory, getting these gene sciences and technological advancements ready for him to show up. And he was just waiting and waiting for probably thousands of years, honestly. to reveal himself and then step in for the good and betterment of humanity. His whole goal is to go against chaos, and that's a big problem.
We should probably touch on chaos. What the heck is the warp?
Mhm.
What's a warp? What's a warp storm?
So basically, the Emperor knew this the whole time, that there exist two realms: our realm, the Materium, and the Immaterium, the warp. In this warp, basically, it was the place where our souls go, our subconscious thoughts, our conscious thoughts, our imaginations, everything that is in our heads and our souls and our hearts goes to the warp. And a long time ago, so this faction called the Eldar, the knife-eared guys, they basically did something very bad. I'm not going to go too much into it. Birthed a new chaos god into existence, and now the warp is ruled by four chaos gods, and all the negative energy surpassed the positive energy, and it started surging into our universe. And that is where the Emperor comes in. He was made to fight chaos.
Now, at this point, humanity has evolved to a spot where they possess psychic powers. Now, that's just a straight evolution thing, or is that part of the technological machinations?
Well, you see, in our primitive era, we all have connections to the warp because that's where our souls go. That's where they kind of exist. And it's sort of like a radio frequency. You are closer to a radio antenna with a radio than another person. And so you might be able to get in, whereas another person would pick up static. So a person who would be closer to that psychic sense would technically be a psyker. The Emperor was pretty much an amalgamation of untold numbers of psychers, all combining their souls into one vessel and trying to defeat chaos to save the souls of humanity one day.
And correct me if I'm wrong. So I'm going to try to give my understanding of the warp for the people. So you had these far-flung planets and things, and they needed to try to travel to them to keep these supply lines going. So they start traveling through the warp, just like light speed or warp drive in Star Trek, yeah. And those incursions awakened those chaos spirits and that negative energy that then tore a hole in the sky, and that's what the Emperor at the point of 40K is trying to hold closed, so that demons and whatnot don't just overrun everybody.
Yes, basically, his whole idea is to cut off humanity's reliance on the warp. During his time and reign and before, we relied on the warp for travel. So, during his Terran Crusade, he took his Thunder Warriors and all of his forms of government to control all of Terra. Then he basically told nobody about chaos at all until I want to say about 10,000 years later, like thousands of years later. He went on this Terran Crusade and united Earth and Mars, where he basically founded the Imperium and met the Adeptus Mechanicus. He was basically trying to fight religion because religion and its sort of worship in any form is a form of energy that can be used to supply the chaos gods to make them stronger.
Right. Like the sort of unhindered zealotry that the like my army that I play, the Chaos Space Marines, they were the good Space Marines that have flipped up against the Imperium,
Yes, basically.
and they are 100% for whatever dark god wants to speak to them at that moment.
Yes, which helps us go into our next topic, which is the Horus Heresy. See, when the Emperor took over Mars and he took over Terra, he founded the Imperium not only on Earth but on Mars. Mars kept the lights on. They gave him the weapons, the Titans, and all the equipment he needed to start his Great Crusade. The ships, Titans, weapons, augmentations. They even helped him with the early Space Marine armor, the what are they called? The Thunder Warriors. They surprisingly disappeared. Ooh, and we can talk about that at another date.
So the factions of the Imperium, you mentioned the Adeptus Mechanicus. They are like they're like uh oh, what was the game? Blade Runner stuff. They're like cyberpunk dudes, right?
Well, yeah, basically.
Now, were they people that moved to Mars,
Well,
augmented themselves, and then they end up building all this war machine for the Emperor?
it
Is that what?
it is basically believed, and I'm going to give you the general truth. People think that they spread out amongst the stars like the humans did before Old Night. They colonized Mars, and then once everybody got cut off, they started worshiping technology. Admech are probably the only religion the Emperor didn't stamp out. Probably most people agree that it was because it was, a lot more effort than it would have cost. He needs somebody to keep the lights on, and they do that. So he basically walked up, saw that they worshipped technology and a machine god, and he said, "I'm the Omnissiah, bring me that which isn't broken." And they brought him a toaster, said, "Fix it," and he fixed it. From then on, he became the Omnissiah, and he was basically like their Jesus to their machine god.
Yeah, because that's where we get into the real irony of this entire thing is the Emperor doesn't want this religious zealotry because it powers the Chaos Gods. The Chaos factions are all about this zealotry, but the zealotry on both sides end up being required for either side to continue. Because without some belief that the Emperor is this higher power, ain't nobody gonna stand for this nonsense.
Oh, 100%. Basically, there's a lot of hypocrisy in 40K. But the truth of the matter is, in 40K, a lot of religion honestly leads back to the chaos gods. Like, if you start a cult and start thinking that, well, let's start making things better for ourselves, let's change the world and make it a better place for everyone, eventually it's going to be revealed you were actually a Zinch cult, a cult of change, and you used magic, yes, for the betterment of your people, but then everybody's going to start growing tentacles or horns or be disabled or blind. However, they're going to be able to cast like warp lightning. So, I mean, trade off?
Yeah, I mean it creates a real dire sort of circumstance where there seems to be no way to win. And I don't understand like where the zealotry powers the stuff. Like, is it just a matter of the population, or is it have to do with like the people's connection to the warp through psychic ability, or what? Because
That's it. Basically it.
because
You
there's no way for the random peon on a planet to win. As soon as you want to make a better society, you are now contributing to the chaos takeover of the universe.
and that goes inherently into the grim dark setting. Nobody's going to win. There's only war. Very grim, not looking like there's going to be a lot of hope.
Yeah, and I mean that shows up in the aesthetic. Today we're talking about lore, but Zach's a great painter. I'm into the painting. The models look so cool, and let me tell you, those Chaos Space Marines that I've got, they are such spiky boys. Like it all just looks like the font on a hardcore metal album. Like everything's got spikes, everything's got tentacles, everything has got just ridiculously over the top aesthetic because the whole entire universe of Warhammer is based around this wanton slaughter and suffering.
Yes, and that's one of the best parts about 40K. But we're gonna get back to the history here for a second because it's gonna kind of hit with this. The Horus Heresy. So basically, the Great Crusade was on. The Emperor left Terra. He had 20 sons he made in that secret lab I told you about. Basically, the Primarchs.
Yeah, and there's like this gene seed thing, and there's some genetic modification going on. Like the Space Marines are born, but they are just as much or more made. Like they're 10 feet tall.
Yeah, they're 8 to 10 feet tall. Like some are even 12 feet tall. Honestly, Tyberos.
And I didn't realize that when you're just looking at the model range, because you'll have a whole army of Space Marines, but then you can go and get your little Astra Militarum, who are just regular old people.
Those 25 millimeter bases.
Yeah, and you put them on the table next to a Space Marine, and they're like
Dwarfs.
titty height.
Yeah. So the Emperor made the Space Marines in the ending days of the Great Crusade. He also made his Primarchs. Now, when he made these Primarchs, something sort of happened. The lore has kind of changed recently. I'm not going to go into it too much, but there was a big warp rift in his secret lab, and all 20 of the Primarchs went off into the galaxy, never to be heard from, until he found them later on.
And the Primarchs are so cool. Like, they're so extra. We will probably have an episode on every single one of them.
Basically. And each of these 20 Primarchs had a legion of Space Marines that would eventually be under their command.
Yeah, so the way the game works is you buy a box of Space Marines, and most of the time you have option to paint them up like any one of a dozen different armies, which is awesome because not everybody's stuff ends up being the same. You look at the book, you look at the box, and you see blue dudes with some gold trim, but that is not all we're talking about. It goes so deep, so hard, and we're just talking about the armies of the Imperium.
Yeah.
We're not even getting into the Chaos ones, which are the
Yeah.
same but different. And then there's Xenos factions, which are just straight aliens.
Yeah, and we're keeping it very vague this episode, if I'm being honest.
Well, it's a lot.
It is a lot. It's like, what, 30 years of lore?
Yeah, it's 30 years of lore, and again, 10th edition's coming out.
Yeah.
They're going simplified, not simple. Henry Cavill is talking about making a show. There are going to be so many people that are new to this hobby, to this game, to this universe, and it's going to be really fun. I imagine there's a whole lot of people that are like, what even is this? And hopefully we can give you guys the primer today and then get more in depth in it in future episodes.
Exactly. And for you to understand what we're going to be going into, it's basically going to be talking about the history and the lore of the Imperium from a point of perspective that you can understand. Because if you're a guy in the modern day and you compare yourself to somebody in the 40K setting, your average Joe, maybe a guy who gets sent into the Imperial Guard, then you're going to understand that vast difference in lifestyle that these people have. And that'll make you love the grim darkness of the 40K, probably even more. So next off, we're going to be talking about the Horus Heresy. During the Great Crusade, basically, the Emperor went around picking up each of his Primarchs. He just like opened the doors, like, "Hey, school's over. Hop on in. Let's go." United them with their legions, and then they went on their Great Crusade to unify all the worlds of the Imperium together. And basically, if you didn't, then he would conquer you and then, take you over.
So at this point, he's using his Primarchs, his sons, and their legions, and he's sending them out all over to basically do what he did on Terra and Mars, which is put the tribes back together. Because I imagine at this stage, all the people in, planet whatever the heck have just been doing their own thing if they haven't got overrun by Xenos or corrupted by Chaos Gods.
Oh, yeah, and a lot of planets were actually cut off by warp storms, which are like big fissures in reality where the warp would leak out and cover vast areas of space. So you couldn't even go into those sections of space.
And next thing you know, your whole planet is growing tentacles out of its head.
Basically. So at the end of this Great Crusade, the Emperor and his 2018 sons basically ended up winning, and he went back to Terra because he believed that if he could break the reliance on the warp that the Imperium had, then he would starve the Chaos Gods. And then he would basically rule the Imperium and hand it over to humanity, and chaos would no longer be a problem. However, certain people did not like that idea, whether they were chaos worshippers or not. Very little people knew about this, actually. He kept it very close to the chest. But his favorite son, the Primarch Horus, was corrupted by this jerk named Erebus of the World Eaters. And basically, Erebus messed everything up.
I submit to you that piece of evidence number one that you may be messing with bad guys is if they call themselves the World Eaters.
Well, actually, I misspoke earlier. That's word bearers, not world eaters. That's my mistake.
Oh, word bearers, not so bad. Get in the comments and tell us what all we got wrong.
So Horus, basically corrupted by chaos, it kind of ate away at his mind. He was a lot stronger thanks to this chaos warp juice that was basically flowing through his veins, and it actually saved his life. However, it started to eat at his mind, kind of like in Lord of the Rings. What's his name?
Smeagol slash Golem and the corrupting power of the ring.
Yeah, basically, it kind of just ate away at his most negative thoughts, like Dad left us. Why should the Imperium go over to normal humans? We're Primarchs and Space Marines. We're better than them. We should govern them, not them govern themselves. And so after that, he rebelled, turned half the Primarchs against the Emperor, and then waged a war across the entire Milky Way galaxy, straight to Terra. And by the end of it, him and most of the Primarchs were crazy and insane from the taint of chaos. And then he ended up in a final battle with the Emperor, and it was a hard fought battle. He killed his brother Sanguinius and mortally wounded the Emperor. And the Emperor finally said, I love you, but I have to do this. And then he used basically like a psychic Kamehameha or mind bullets, some people have described it. He blasted Horus with this, and Horus was immediately wiped of all chaos taint. Looked at himself and was like, what have I done? And then he's like, you have to kill me. So the Emperor did it again, and he didn't just destroy him, he destroyed his soul so that chaos couldn't bring their chosen champion back from the warp.
Which is a thing that Chaos likes to do. Like, I love when we get into the Primarchs, how I can start to play the game. Does he have a model? Does he? And Horus does, and it's sick. It's like a competition piece. I'm sure you've seen it on Instagram. It comes with the two different bases. One where he's like on a whole pile of skulls and bodies. It's as metal as you can imagine.
So after which, Chaos kind of fled. They all ran into the warp. All the Chaos Traitor Legions, their Primarchs, all fled into the warp. Well, except for the Alpha Legion. But who knows what they're doing. Rogaldorn, Primarch of the Imperial Fist, took the Emperor and put him on his golden throne, which was the project he was working on to kind of cut off the Imperium from having to rely on the warp.
Right, because that's the thing that is what channels all those 1,000 psychers a day into, to sort of like juice up the Emperor's psychic ability to attempt to keep the warp shut or close the warp, right?
Yes, basically, he gets his soul relit. Like, imagine a candle going out. It's basically taking that candle, picking it up, and then putting another hunk of candle underneath that partially melted candle, and it kind of continues to burn. But it's almost there, so you gotta hurry up and put more under there, or it's gonna go out. Because not only is he living off of this golden throne, it is also a psychic beacon, like a lighthouse, for when the Imperium wants to travel through the warp. They basically go through the warp and they see where they are in relation to the light of the golden throne in the warp. And they're like, okay, if that's there, I'm here. If that goes out, they lose all warp travel.
Just totally lost in the dark with all the chaos energy and demons and everything else floating around trying to jump in their ship. I mean, and ironically, despite the Emperor's best efforts, still using warp travel, still cruising through this dangerous thing, still making it worse by the day, just to keep the whole thing churning.
Basically, and a lot of people think that this was the Emperor's plan all along, that he's playing something like four-dimensional hyper chess, saying that he is going to treat Primarchs bad so that good Primarchs he does treat, hedge his bets a little bit, and then he wins in the end. But it's kind of complicated. We're not 100% sure, but that is kind of the agreed on fandom.
And the cost of this is just innumerable lives on the daily.
Oh, 100%. In the end, he ended up being on the world's biggest life support system. Chaos Primarchs ran off into the warp, and humanity was, in a sense, more or less cut off. A lot of it was still connected, but a lot has still even yet to reconnected. Like I read a book the other day about a world that hasn't been in touch with the Imperium since the Horus Heresy even happened, and that was 10,000 years ago.
Yeah, so sometimes you'll see 30K referenced, and what they're talking about is the Horus Heresy game system and model range, which is all like these. They look like proto Space Marines. They have little beaks and things, and they're not. I don't think they're quite as interesting looking as like the mainline 40K
Hmm.
stuff. But it's sort of like your Star Wars prequels too, where the technology isn't quite as slick in some spots, but then it's much cleaner in others. Just to show how where the dirt has piled up over the 10,000 years.
Yes, basically, because of their belief in science and knowledge over religion and faith, the Imperium and the Emperor kind of went through a golden age of technology where they kind of reclaimed all the old technology that was lost and advanced humans way farther. We were nowhere near where we were, but we were way better off where we were at before he joined us.
And no AI either.
Yes, because during Old Night we did have a AI rebellion, which ended up causing, and that in addition to warp storms is one of the reasons why humanity was cut off before the Emperor came.
Yeah, so a lot of the times you see one of those diagrams of like a 40K tank, for instance. You'll see what looks like just the torso of a corpse, and that is what they now use for AI or microchips, if you will, which is metal AF and totally bleeped up.
Yes, servitors. They are probably the most disturbing. I would say disturbing part of 40K. They take basically your people who are criminals, dangerous criminals, people who have performed violent crimes, are thrown out of society. Generally what we believe, but there's probably some error there. And they shove a bunch of cables and computers into them, lobotomize them so they feel no pain, and they use them to run all of their computers and their ships, technology in general,
That is a meat computer, is what we're saying.
basically. And that goes into what we're about to talk about, which is the current 40K setting. See, after the Primarchs left and the Chaos Primarchs went into the warp, some of the Primarchs went after them. The Emperor was basically a corpse. He's barely holding on from dying. And the Loyalist Primarchs either went after the Chaos Primarchs into the warp or basically held the line and restructured the Imperium into a more flexible setting. That's where you have Rabute Gilliman, the Avenging Sun, the Son of Ultramar, the Ultramarine Primarch leading things.
And it's my favorite game. Does he have a model?
He does have a model. He just got a new model. I think was a year ago, 2 years ago.
He looks sick. It's so much gold trim to paint, but he looks wicked.
Yes. Basically, for the last 10,000 years, the Imperium had to go its own. The Primarchs, in some way or other, either got injured or went missing, and the Imperium had to carry on by itself. Thanks to the Primarchs, the Emperor, and also Malkador the Sigillite, who was the Emperor's right hand man, they left systems in place to keep going. And as things got worse and worse and worse, either through bureaucracy, aristocracy, warp storms, whatever have you, the Imperium held the line, and the person at the front of these lines was usually a Space Marine. Space Marines basically held the line with the Imperial Guard and fought off Xenos, fought off your Chaos, fought off any threat, internal or external to the Imperium that basically popped up. And that basically went on for 10,000 years while technology stagnated and did not advance.
And their form of government stagnated too. Like
Oh, yeah.
as soon as the emperor goes on the throne, the whole thing starts to just get bloated and slow.
You got
And
the Inquisition.
I mean, you never want to have an inquisition.
Yeah, the Goj Vandar. I don't know if you know.
As a system of rule, you always want to avoid inquisitions.
Basically. And bureaucracy factions, aristocracy factions. Heck, even Space Marine factions popped up that started to kind of go their own way, as Fleetwood Mac would say.
And all like super zealous about it too. Like this is the way, you know. I mean, like the Mandalorians. This is the way. We're the ones that keep our helmet on. The rest of them are like, that's not. We don't even have helmets.
Yes, and basically Chaos started attacking the Imperium. Every now and again, you had something called a Great Crusade, which was led by Horus's favorite son, his first captain, Ezekiel Abaddon. Abaddon became the chosen of Chaos, started the Black Legion, which was amalgamation of all the Chaos Space Marines into one legion, and then he led these different crusades against the Imperium. A lot of people called him Failbadon because all of these great crusades, there was probably 12 of them, and I don't think any of them succeeded. However, it was later revealed that this was all for a greater purpose.
And my favorite game. Does he have a model? Oh yes. Oh yes, he does. And he's got cheesy rules. His Black Legion is the army that I've got, that I run, that I play with. They're so fun to paint. Black armor, gold trim, horns and spikes all over the place. As metal as you can imagine.
So basically, while Chaos was attacking the Imperium, also Xenos were attacking the Imperium. Whole swathes of sectors and solar systems were lost to not only Chaos, but also to Xenos. You know, you've got Orcs, which are your greenskins. You've got Eldar coming back to take over their former world that they lost probably billions of years ago. And the Necrons are waking up and attacking, and they're like Terminator pharaohs that just pop up from the ground and take back their planets.
So imagine you're a dude trying to, grow some turnips on whatever alien world. You know that you're a part of the Imperium because maybe there's an old sign, an old road sign or something. And all of a sudden, Tyranids, which Tyranids, which are the Starship Trooper bugs, just come and start eating everything. And I mean you. They're eating you. They're eating everybody you know. They're overrunning literally the entire planet. And you're like, I thought that the Imperium was here to protect us, and they will be. It could take them a couple hundred years to get there.
Yes, so after the Emperor went on his golden throne, Gilliman broke down the legions of the Loyalist chapters and turned them in, or the Loyalist legions, and turned them into chapters. They went from 10,000 to 15,000 man legions of Space Marines to 1,000 man chapters. And these chapters were basically supposed to be smaller forces that would be more flexible, easily maneuverable to deal with these threats. So, for example, you had the Octarius sector, which I know a lot of people really love the Octarius sector. It was basically an entire space ruled by orcs. And I think it was the Arch Overfiend, ruled this area. The Imperium sent an assassin to kill him, but he just kept popping up every time they killed him. He just pop up on another planet. So the Imperium and their Inquisition, a man named Kripman, sent a bunch of Tyranids with a couple. He just shot a few gene stealers in there, said, "Go get them, Tyranids," and the Tyranids were like, "Ooh, that looks yummy." However, a lot of people got really mad, and he was kind of fired from the Inquisition because the orcs grow on conflict and the Tyranids grow on biomass. So whoever came out of that battle is basically going to be all more powerful.
Yeah, I mean, you never want to be sending a extraterrestrial race onto a planet to try to destroy another one. That seems like bad guy behavior, Zach.
Basically, I mean, you've got Tyranids popping up and eating your planet, stripping it of everything. You've got orcs attacking your supply lines, your planets, just for the fun of it. And then you've got Chaos either converting your followers secretly, because the Emperor told no one about Chaos. And to this day, just before the rebirth of Rabute Gilliman, and we'll get into that in a second, no one knows about Chaos. And if you did, you were executed. So it's pretty grimdark. And you could be worshiping the Emperor. And turns out you're secretly worshiping a Chaos god.
Yeah, it's totally ridiculous. We've got so much to get to. We've got the Primarchs. We've got, what the heck's a chapter? There's so many.
Yes. Gilliman basically broke down these chapters, and the Space Marines made their own factions. But recently, there's been a new hope. Gilliman has returned to the setting. He basically took a long nap, was recovering. Some people thought he was dying, some people didn't. And when he woke up, thanks to a lot of trickery and a lot of technology and a lot of hopes and prayers, thoughts and prayers, basically, he came back. And then he asked his best friend Belisarius Call, "Hey, were you working on that project I asked you to do 10,000 years ago?" And he said, "Yes."
What project was that?
The Primaris Marines.
Do they have a model?
They 100% do have a model. They are basically Space Marine 2.0.
Yeah, they're a whole facelift. Like, they look great. They're fun to paint.
Oh,
they're
100%.
they're super highly detailed. And I mean, today we've talked about the lore, but we plan to talk about the game, which is going to be really exciting with the 10th coming out. We've got so much more lore. You've got one more point on the lore?
We're gonna
we
hit one more point, and then it's gonna be done.
We have been all over the place on what the heck is the Imperium, and it's a lot.
It is 100% too much.
It's so much, but hopefully you've gotten a little bit of a handle on what we're talking about as we've bounced around, through the surface layer stuff of what the Imperium is. But hit us with the last spot.
So basically, Gilliman has revamped the Imperium, pumped new blood into this dying corpse of a organization, given them new Space Marines, countless numbers of Space Marines to refill these chapters, save these planets. But even in the face of that new hope, most people still think this is the time of ending, that this is the end, the decline, the final phase of humanity. What do you think, Shane?
Well, how could you not think that when in the 41st millennium there is only war?
And we're going to leave you guys to be the judge of that, because one thing about 40K is it's all up to you. It's up to the fans to keep that perspective. You be the judge. Is this a time of ending? You figure that out for yourselves as we continue these lore videos and give them to you in these, I don't want to say bite-sized pieces, but let's them like this stuff.
Yeah, and as we focus in on stuff too, we can get a lot more particular. Once again, this was a real surface level kind of thing. But get in the comments and tell us what we got wrong. Tell us what you didn't like. What do we need to do to help you to know more about the Imperium or other 40K things? Put your suggestions for new shows down there. Like and subscribe and rate and review and all of those kinds of things that YouTubers / podcasts say.
Yeah, thanks you guys for listening to 40K Fanatics, and we will see you soon. Like and subscribe. Have a good day.